Hey guys, Red here. Today we're doing another Red interview, and this time we're doing a Red interview with Hero of the Mime. If you wouldn't mind going and introduce yourself for me right quick.
Yeah, of course. I'm Mark, or Hero of Mime is my user on all platforms. I'm an event entertainer, street performer, and a number of other things.
I was going to say, I know there's a couple things I wanted to touch up on in the interview, one of which was the Hero of Mime, but you also do other characters, correct?
Yeah, so Hero of Mime is kind of my brand name, and performing as the elf or as Link is sort of branded directly off of that. That's why I called the act Hero of Mime. But I like to think of Hero of Mime as kind of the overall name because I do a number of characters. So I kind of put them all under the banner. Yeah, I'm better phrased as like Hero of Mime Entertainment or something like that because really Link is not the only character I do, but he is the one that the act is named after.
What other characters do you do?
So right now I have two others. I perform as a merman where the occasion calls for it, and his name is Kai Lochan or Kai, and he's a Scottish merman. And then I also perform as a fairy, and his name is Thistle. He's a river fairy.
You were mentioning how he was a Scottish mermaid. Does your Scottishness come out in a lot of your characters?
No, so the only character I have that speaks right now is Kai. Thistle's also a silent character. I got my start in event performing with miming, and so more of my stuff has been silent. So he is very Scottish, but the other two characters aren't really.
I know you're Scottish through your posts, and I know you were married in your kilt, which is one thing that definitely I was following you before, but that was a big thing for me because my family actually comes from the Scottish line. Uh, Whenever I got married, I actually got married in my kilt as well. Is that something? Are you 100% Scottish? Is it just Scottish line? What is?
Sure. I'm actually Irish, and the kilt I wore for my wedding was an Irish tartan. My family were Irish immigrants. A couple generations. It was my great grandmother. So a few generations ago, she came off the boat into New York from Ireland. And so I have German ancestry as well, but a huge part of my life and my culture is our Irish roots.
You mentioned that you've been doing the miming and the different stuff, and that's how you got into it. How long have you been into it?
I started in 2014. I was just out of high school and was looking for performing, acting jobs, things like that. And the Colorado Renaissance Festival was the first gig I ever booked as a performer. And so I started that then, and I've been doing it ever since.
That that's been 12 years. What you mentioned the different festivals. I know you're in a different time zone from one that I met you in. How far have you traveled for the Renaissance Fair? What's the furthest one you've traveled for?
So I'm based in Dallas, Texas, and so the furthest I have driven for any festival would be the Pittsburgh Renaissance Festival from there. Pittsburgh Renaissance Festival is about a 22-hour drive from my house. So that's the furthest I've ever gone. In terms of distance across the country, I've been as far west as Colorado and as far east as Florida.
Fair enough. That's a lot of traveling.
Yeah.
Mentioned that two of your characters mime and two of your characters sign and are silent. Well, besides the fact that Link doesn't normally have a voice and he just makes the noises, what was the decision behind that?
That really was the decision. There wasn't much behind it besides that. I thought that Link did not speak. You know, in my view, canonically, Link does not speak, and I know that's not true in every game, but it's true in many of the games. And so from there, I said, all right, well, if I am going to perform and be Link, I want it to be very authentic, and so, but I also can't not communicate, and so it just made sense to be able to do ASL for like and to make it authentic, and then it also makes it accessible. Festivals aren't exactly here, deaf accessible most of the time, It gets better. Different festivals do interpreter days and things like that. But in general, when you're going to a festival, if you are hard of hearing or you cannot hear, you are going to miss out on a substantial amount of the experience. So to be able to provide something to that community was also a priority for me that I kind of came to while deciding how am I going to do this. And so it all kind of came together to be like, let's do Silent Link who will communicate with ASL and that will be kind of the performance.
Fair enough. A lot of the inspiration behind Link is obviously Link the character in the games and such. How much of your own personal spin do you put onto it?
Very little, to be honest. I try to, it's interesting because Link as a character doesn't get a lot of development because he's supposed to be the conduit for the player. And so I don't know that there's, to the extent that everyone has a personal spin on Link, I think may be true, but I have tried to make Link just the hero everyone wants him to be when I perform as him. And so when they meet him, he's very friendly. He's very friendly in the games, and he's a hero, and he is, someone to aspire up to. So I suppose I try to do all of those things, but to the extent that I've put any spin on it, I don't know that I would say I have.
The biggest reason I bring it up is I noticed a couple of the posts had like a couple of the like Link in the kilts and such, which would be, in my opinion, your own spin on it because it would be like,
Sure.
well, that's not game official, but like, oh, cool.
Sure.
Or a couple of the other outfits has a bit of a twang to it and just a you
Sure, that's
inspired.
fair. When making the costumes, I really have had a few priorities in mind. So the first is that I want Link. My philosophy behind performing as Link is if you're going to be Link, you shouldn't just be one of them. You should be all of them. And so I've tried to make my costume, particularly my base costume, the green one, it incorporates elements from as many of the different games as I've been able to do. And so the goal with that being that when you meet Link, he is all of them. It is the whole legacy of the character. And so that's why I have the Zonai battery, as well as the Ocarina, as well as the Wind Waker, and so many other elements on my costume, because I try to have a piece from each of the different Links so that that's there. So you could say that that's me putting a spin on it. In terms of other costumes, festivals often have themed weekends, and so usually that's more related to that. The Celtic look I came up with because so many festivals have a Celtic weekend, and it just gives it a little bit more variety. You're not wearing the same costume every single day. It's fun to kind of have the alternative looks. So that's kind of where those come from. In addition, you'll see some times where I'm dressed as Link, where I might be wearing like a flower crown or some other element that's not part of the original costume. And usually that's to comply with festival rules. Different festivals have rules on characters and what they have to be wearing at certain times.
How many different versions of Link do you have?
I think. Yeah, I have five-ish, if you count the. Yes, that sounds right. Because I have Ocarina of Time or Twilight Princess. You could call them the same. They're both the green app costume. I have the Breath of the Wild costume. Uh, and I have a Tears of the Kingdom look for that because in Tears of the Kingdom he adds a lot of leather armor and things like that. So I have that costume that can kind of be both. I have the Tears of the Kingdom Ancient tunic, which is like the outfit you start in that game. I have the Celtic outfit, which is not certainly, as you point out, not one that's in the game, so I think is a very cool look. And then I also have the Desert Gerudo Vey costume, which I'm actually about to debut officially in a couple weeks here.
Ooh, spoilers. You mentioned all the different costumes for Link. You also mentioned having two other characters that you use. Um, the fairy, I have not personally seen unless I missed it, which I probably just missed it. Um,
Probably he's not hired very often, so you may not have seen him very much, but he's around.
Yay, listen. What is his story? What do you bring to that character?
Sure. Thistle really came out of, and maybe this is pulling the curtain too far back. Thistle really came out of necessity because there was a festival that was interested in hiring me, but they needed a fairy, and so they said we'd like to hire Link for X number of weekends, but we need you to have a ferry. So could you put that together? And so I brought him together as a result. So he's maybe the least developed of my options. But the idea behind Thistle is that he's all about fun. And he's much with Link, I don't tend to get into kind of the mischievous side of mime work that you can see in kind of classic mime performance. But Thistle, I really flex that. And so Thistle's much more, rather than kind of a stationary musical performance, with Thistle, I tend to move around a lot more and incorporate a lot more of the mischievous side of miming. And so that's kind of where he comes from. No one really, I don't haven't developed like a backstory for Thistle because he also doesn't talk. That's not something that's really relevant to him. But in terms of performing style, that's what that looks like.
That sounds really fun to see, and I would be curious on the watching the differences in the acting nature. Just because even acting, you have to like pull different parts, and you have to be such a certain way. Um,
Yeah.
with that in mind, do you ever get drained of doing it, like for a job? Like, do you ever get burnt out of doing it?
It's definitely really tiring, and I think that's one reason it's important to kind of watch yourself in terms of how much you book. I have done as many as 9 months of festival in a year, and as few as one, but normally on a normal year, as few as like three to four-ish. And definitely when you push into the 9 months of performing, it can be a lot. But I wouldn't say I get tired of performing so much as just the total package of doing the performing, managing the travel, and just the existence of life kind of comes together to make it draining. So I wouldn't say that by itself I get tired of it, but I also probably wouldn't want to do it year round. I'm glad that it is. I get some time off from it too.
Yeah, I was wondering if the social aspect also kind of drained it too, because that social battery would just be gone.
I mean, that's a daily thing, but you get up the next day and you do it again, and it's a good time.
um, we talked about Thistle. We've talked about Link. I am curious on the Merman. Sorry.
Yeah.
Um, how did that come to be? What was the little behind the curtains with that one, or behind the I don't know, I guess curtain pool?
Curtain was the right word, I think. I have always been a fan of mermaids and mermen. I like think mermaid culture is really cool, and one thing that kind of inspired me to not just go show up as Link and be at the fair, but like make this into a performance, is that I think it's really important that young boys are exposed to fantasy because I think there's a lot of culture that fantasy type stuff, unless it's like Lord of the Rings, where it's very manly, dwarves sort of thing. Like boys aren't allowed to like fairies, boys aren't allowed to like mermaids and things like that. And so I wanted to make my act, I guess if you could say I had any sort of mission in mind, it's to be able to show kids that, particularly boys, that it's okay to like these things and that even if it's something that's traditionally considered more feminine, that it is something accessible to you. If I had gotten to meet a merman as a little kid, it would have just made my whole world. I would have thought that was so amazing. But mermaids were only for girls growing up for me, and so I like to be able to bring that to the table. So Kai sort of spawned out of that desire, and he's become interestingly, my one he's not hired as often as Link, because the mermaid industry is kind of its own performing industry that's very competitive, but he's easily one of my most loved. Whenever people do meet him, whenever he is booked at events, he is very popular. And I think that's because he gets to connect with people and he gets to be a character because he's not silent that gets really the opportunity to connect one on one with people and really make that experience. And I've gotten to fulfill my mission a little bit because I've had a lot of little boys who have been really inspired by the fact that they've never gotten to meet a male performer who is doing something in the fantasy niche, and that really makes their day.
That's actually a really cool mission to have for something like that because it definitely does not have as a variety as the female stars like that would. Um, with that in mind, especially that being the goal and the desire behind it, Do you get much pushback or much dislike or hatred towards or anything?
Once in a while you'll get some bigot that says that boys can't be mermaids. It does happen occasionally, but it's pretty seldom. And I would actually I'd expect to see it more online than I do. But only once or twice at like a festival have I had a parent who was upset or who at least expressed it to. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people who are upset who just kind of, are like, we're walking away from this. But I've only ever had a couple instances where a parent was like visibly not okay with the fact that there was a male merman. And it probably stems from both toxic patriarchal values in society and from homophobia. There's the stereotype that all mermen are gay. And so showing your child a merman is going to make your kid gay or something like that, which is both ridiculous and uninformed, but also just untrue. And so I think it stems from that, but it's really, really seldom. I have been pleasantly surprised by how rare that sort of conduct has been.
Fair enough.
I will say it does affect hiring, though. It is much, much more difficult to get hired as a male mermaid performer than as a female mermaid performer. All the time, I will be, I'll have people reach out interested in a gig, thinking that I run a mermaid company, and so then they are interested in hiring a woman.
Mm,
But then when they learn that I only have a male performer available, they're no longer interested. And that's very common. So it's definitely still, I mean, the discrimination is still a thing. And it's not just true for male mermen. This is true for mermaids of color and mermaids who are, not the skinny type, who are plus sized or in any other version of that. So I won't pretend that I'm the only one facing those sorts of adversities. It happens across the board. Really, if you're not a white female skinny mermaid, you're going to face this sort of treatment. So it still needs to be worked on, but the reception I've had when I am hired has always been pleasant.
that's interesting. I know never actually an aspect or even it's something I'd really even probably considered, even thought about. Makes sense, and I get it, but also, huh. um, well, actually, so speaking of the Ren fairs, since you've been for there for so many long years, have you got any like embarrassing or funny stories that have still stuck with you for all these years?
Embarrassing or funny stories. I mean, there's funny things that happen every day. In terms of embarrassing, I think the most embarrassed I've ever been is that I just get these drunk ladies who, like middle-aged women who are just like way too touchy and are trying to do the flirting. And I'm just like, I have no interest, please leave me alone. So that's never fun. That's not really a funny story, but it's not a fun one. Trying to think if I have any funny things that have happened recently. The funniest thing in general that happens is I think is just that kids say the darndest things, and so they get so excited to see Link, and sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't understand why I'm not talking, sometimes they do, but kind of regardless, the reactions I get to see, kind of the joy on their faces, those are the fun and funny times.
Fair enough. That's completely understandable because that I mean I'm sure going as a kid and understanding like, hey, this is someone like, oh, this is who I believe this is, and you're kind of just looking, going, well, I get it. They're also this is a job, and like that separation for the kids would make sense. Um, do you have a handler every time that you go to Ren fairs, or you try your best to have a handler because you don't speak?
I have a handler, particularly in scenarios where I can afford them because I'm being paid enough to afford one, and where I will need the extra help. So at Colorado, for example, I do not have a handler here. I just do it all myself. And actually, I would say in general, having a handler is a much more recent development because I've been getting into gigs that pay me sufficiently to make it happen. So I would like to have a handler everywhere, but I certainly don't yet.
Well, I the only reason I bring it up is I remember I don't remember their name, and I don't even remember they were next to you with dragons, with the dragon puppets.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about Onyx the Fairy is
That's the one.
his name.
Yep.
That's his handle. Yeah, and he was a wonderful handler at Surf this year.
Hmm. Yeah, he was just wonderful to chat with and chatted with both of us and talked about what you were doing, and it was just like, all right, cool, all right. But yeah, and then I saw his Instagram and just didn't know if that was friend of yours or handler or what it was. And anyhow, um,
I'll always take a handler where I can get it, but I can't always get it. Just depends on the venue.
fair enough, it makes sense. With the mermaid, I'm guessing that has to be a limited time thing, especially because you're in the water the whole time. How does realistically what? How does that work?
So typically, if you're a mermaid performer and you don't own your own tank, which is most mermaid performers, it's a big undertaking to have your own tank. You are working for venues that do have them, and so either the venue will have an unheated pool that you can only do in the summer, or if they have a heated environment, you can do it whenever you want to. Um, and so it just depends on whose pool or tank you're swimming in. And but there are lots of gigs where the hire people that are not in the water. I've done plenty of dry. They're called a dry land gig, and usually that involves you sitting in some aesthetic place, like you could be in a tent that's decorated with pillows and like oceanography, things like that, iconography. You could be on like a throne that has somewhere place for you to sit. There's all sorts of variations of this that you can see, but lots of festivals and other events do dry mermaid people because they still want to have the interaction, but they don't have the infrastructure for water. So that happens plenty.
Fair enough. That makes the most sense. How long did it take you to train to be a mermaid? Because that's not something you can just do overnight.
No, but I've always been a good swimmer. I grew up swimming. I grew up surfing. I've always been huge into the ocean and the water. So I was able to pick up mermaiding really from day one. From the day I got my tail, it did not take much practice for me to be able to do it. But certainly most people, if you're not a strong swimmer, it takes a lot of getting used to. And that said, I do still train for it because just because you can swim does not mean you can perform in the water. So even now, like I train ever so often to make sure that I'm able to keep up those skills and perform.
Fair enough. Makes sense. I mean, I'm sure that comes with everything you do with the ASL and making a
Indeed.
refresher. Um, and then the ferry work, and such. Um, when it comes to you doing this for a secondary job or jobber, um, did you have inspirations for going into this, or just hey, like you mentioned before about just wanting a different job outside of, or wanting a job in theater mime work?
No, I mean when I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to perform, and so that's what I went and did, and so that's I stumbled into it then, and I just kept doing it.
We talked about it before. You're happily married. Does your partner come with you all the time to all the different conventions? Do they normally stay home?
Typically, he stays home. He is full-time employed, and so he can only travel in very limited senses. And so, if he's going to travel, it's going to be because he's taking time off or something like that. So very rarely. He definitely visits, but if he's going to visit, it'll be like for a weekend or something. It's not a situation where he's on the road with me the whole time.
Have you struggled with making the separation from him?
Yeah, we kind of have a standing rule that we don't spend more than 3 weeks apart. And so that's kind of been how we've managed it. So either if I'm going to be gone longer than that, he will fly to me or I will fly to him, and we just make it work that way. So I schedule my life with that in mind, and we just coordinate and make sure that it's not too difficult. We found that longer than 3 weeks is where we start to really miss each other. Not that we don't miss each other less than that, we certainly do, but 3 weeks is sort of our breaking point, so we don't go beyond that.
Makes sense. I wasn't
Makes
sure.
sense.
Like,
I wasn't
do you
sure.
have any recommendations when it comes to the long distance aspect of it?
Not really, because I think we make it work because we already had a solid relationship before I was gone too much. And we even had experience when I was gone longer than 3 weeks at a time, and it was just really, really hard. And so we decided to nix that. So to me, it doesn't feel like a distance relationship because I'm home enough that, and we see each other enough that I'm just, on work trips every so often. But if I'm seeing him every 10 to 15 days at a minimum, and when I'm home for, longer periods of time, I'm just home, that it doesn't feel like that to me. So I don't know that I have great advice on distance relationships, but I can say that any relationship that communication is by far the most important thing. My partner and I are extremely adept communicators, and we talk about everything with each other all the time, and that by itself, I think, is the only reason are still together.
The only issue you had like was drunk older middle-aged women coming up being a little too more handsy. Um, is there any anxiety behind like, oh, I have to make sure I'm staying professional? Also, like, hey, you're being a bit weird. How do you handle that and making that separation and like, hey, I need help?
I just don't really deal with it, frankly. I'm too old to deal with nonsense from folks. So if I really am having a problem, I'll just leave. And if I am having a problem where it's like I need, often I'll know, plenty of people on site, so I'll call someone over if I need them to help me get out of a jam. But it's pretty rare that it happens to the point where I can't handle it. So it's been fine, really.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you had like dealt with any of the anxiety or the struggle with that degree with the job. Okay, that answers that question. Um, okay. Um, I know you made a post the other day, like a couple weeks ago, maybe it was, about like the five nightmares, like the trend going around about like, um, what other misunderstandings or like, what's your most frustrating misunderstandings that you have with like the Common Core people?
So I suppose the most frustrating thing I deal with right now is trinket trading, and I've made a number of videos on that that can be seen on my profile because it just feels like the conversation will never end, and that no matter how much is said about it, no matter who chimes in on it, I mean, people far more famous than me have chimed in on it, and it just does not seem to stop. And so it's frustrating because I just want to kind of hit resolutions when we have conversations about issues, and it doesn't seem like a solution is ever going to be incoming on trinket trading. The only other things that I find more annoying than frustrating are people who don't appreciate their performers. I don't think everyone has to tip when you visit a festival, but particularly if you're engaging that performer in their time and asking them to do things for you, you should be tipping your performers because this is how they make their living. I had one dad one time who asked me to film a TikTok with his kids. And so I was like, yeah, I guess sure. So his kids were dressed as Korax. And so he basically hid his kids. And then he was like, now we'll film Ling going and finding the Korax. And the Korax will go, yeah, ha ha. And, it only took, what, a minute, 2 minutes of my time. So it wasn't a big deal. But it was like, that's kind of a lot to ask a performer to do for you when they're doing their own job. They have plenty of other people to entertain. Why do I have to make this TikTok with you? But I did because I'm nice. And then he didn't tip me, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, that was not just you should tip the performer. Like, if you ask a performer to film a TikTok with you, that's like a $5 tip, $10 tip situation. So I was kind of shocked. And so in general, I think people don't appreciate enough that the performing arts rely on patronage. That's where they come from. In the 1400s, kings would patronize playwrights by saying, I will fund your thing so that you can do it. And so, the patronage has moved now to the common folk, shall we say, but we live off of patronage. And so as a result, we need that support. And so if people want to keep performing arts around, they need to not just love it, but financially and social media support it because that is what we need.
I mean, it makes sense. What about a couple of new shows coming out that you can tell me about? That way I can put them up on the screen and kind of mention. or what's cool things you're
Sure.
working on?
So I'll be headed to the Nebraska Renaissance Festival in Elkhorn, Nebraska on at the end of August, that last weekend. I think it's August 29th and 30th, maybe 28th, 29th. It's that last weekend in August. That's a show I've never done before. I'm very excited to head out there and see how that goes. I'll be doing the St. Louis Renaissance Festival, which I do every year. This season, I'm doing 5 of their 7 weekends, so I'll be there in September and all of October. And then I'm also doing the Clayshire Medieval Fair in Indiana. That's I don't know the city that's in, but it's in like Northwest Indiana. And that's the last weekend of September that I'm doing, and that's kind of the run of my festivals for the remainder of the.
All right, sounds like a plan. I'll throw a couple of your links down in the description, Instagram, TikTok, etc. Um, do you have anything else you would like to say to the audience before we end the interview?
No, I really appreciate y'all listening. I hope you enjoy my work. If you ever want to see more, you can go to heroofmime.com or to any of my socials to look up what I do. I really appreciate the support.
Alrighty. Thank you guys for listening, and you guys have a good night. Goodbye.